I looked at that photo from Nuuk this morning. You see the snow, you see the ice, but look closer. You see the maple leaf flying right next to the French tricolor. That visual isn't just diplomacy, that is a wall. For the first time in years, Canada didn't just show up to a meeting, we built a fortress. Because here's what actually happened on February 6, 2026. While Washington was busy drafting new tariff threats against Canadian steel and aluminum, two planes landed in Greenland. One carried Canada's foreign minister and a delegation of Inuit leaders. The other carried the foreign minister of France. They didn't go there for a photo op. They didn't go there to shake hands. They went there to execute a synchronized diplomatic landing that changes the math of the Arctic forever. Think about the timing. Usually, opening a consulate takes years. Permits, staffing, security checks. It's slow work. But this happened in less than 6 weeks after Donald Trump threatened to buy Greenland. And notice who was standing there. It wasn't just diplomats. You had the chief of the defense staff. You had the president of the Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami. And you had the French consul planting the first EU flag on that soil. The media called it a ceremony. They missed the point. This wasn't a ribbon cutting. This was a tripwire. Mark Carney just placed a nuclear power, France, right in the path of American expansion. And he did it without firing a single shot. Today we're going to look at the map. We're going to look at the treaty that nobody is talking about, Article 42.7. And we're going to explain why the most dangerous thing in the Arctic right now isn't the ice. It's the alliance that Canada just built on top of it. First, let's be clear about what's at stake. Donald Trump isn't looking at Greenland because he likes the view. He's looking at it because of what's buried underneath it. Just north of where those diplomats stood, you have the Kvanefjeld deposit. Geologists have been staring at this spot for decades. The United States Geological Survey estimates there are 1.5 million tons of rare earth oxides sitting there. Now, numbers get boring until you realize what they mean. These aren't just rocks. These are the specific, heavy, rare earths you need for permanent magnets. The kind that go into the guidance system of a Tomahawk missile. The kind that go into the F-35 fighter jet. The kind that power every single electric vehicle battery. But here is the catch that most people miss. Finding rare earths is easy. Processing them is incredibly hard. It is dirty, toxic, and complex. Right now, China controls roughly 90% of the processing chain for these materials. That is a chokehold on the North American defense sector. If you are the President of the United States looking at that map, you have two choices. You can beg China for the materials you need to build your own weapons, or you can secure a source closer to home. Greenland is that source. It is the only viable alternative that can break China's monopoly in this decade. And that is why Trump called it a real estate deal. To him, it's an acquisition target. It's a distressed asset. He looks at Denmark and sees a landlord he can bully. But here is where the calculation changes. While estimates vary and the exact tonnage is still being mapped, the strategic value remains undisputed. Whoever controls Kvanefjeld controls the future of Western manufacturing. Canada knows this. Mark Carney knows this. And they know that if the U.S. takes control of Greenland, whether by purchase or by pressure, Canada gets encircled. Look at the map again. Alaska to the west, Greenland to the east. If both are controlled by an aggressive America First administration, the Canadian Arctic isn't a sovereign territory anymore. It's just a transit corridor for American resources. So when Canada opened that consulate, it wasn't about visas. It was about staking a claim on the resource map. It was about saying, you are not the only customer in town. But Canada couldn't do this alone. And this is where the genius of the strategy comes in. If it was just Canada standing next to Denmark, Trump wouldn't blink. He'd threaten a 25% tariff on Canadian steel, and Ottawa would have to calculate the cost. So Mark Carney didn't just bring a checkbook. He brought France. Why France? This is the detail that changes everything. France is a NATO member, yes, but more importantly, France is the military backbone of the European Union. By bringing France into nuke, Canada activated a completely different set of rules. Here's the genius of this move that nobody in Washington saw coming. Trump dominates NATO. He can twist arms in Brussels, but he has zero leverage over the internal mechanisms of the EU. By bringing France, a nuclear power and EU heavyweight, Mark Carney didn't just bring a friend. He activated a completely separate defense treaty that the U.S. president cannot veto. It's a checkmate using someone else's rook. That treaty is Article 42.7 of the Treaty on European Union. You need to understand the difference between this and NATO. Most people know NATO Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all. But read the fine print. Article 5 says allies will take action as they deem necessary. As they deem necessary. That is diplomatic code for we might do something or we might do nothing. If the U.S. decides action isn't necessary, nothing happens. EU Article 42.7 is different. It says member states have an obligation of aid and assistance by all the means in their power. That is not a suggestion. That is a law. It is binding. It is automatic. And it is outside of American control. Denmark is in the EU. France is in the EU. By planting the French flag in nuke, any aggression toward Greenland, economic, political, or territorial, is no longer a bilateral issue between Trump and a small island. It becomes a direct challenge to the European Union's sovereignty. This is a classic tripwire strategy. You place a small force, in this case a diplomatic one, in the path of the adversary. Not to defeat them in battle, but to guarantee that if they move forward, they trigger a much larger conflict. Trump might risk a trade war with Denmark, but is he ready to risk a trade war with the entire European common market? Is he ready to bully a nuclear-armed France? Probably not. The cost just went up. Canada didn't have to threaten the U.S. We simply invited a friend who makes the threat impossible. There is one more layer to this shield, and it's one that money can't buy. You noticed who else was in that delegation? Natan Obed. Why does the president of the Inuit Nunangat matter in a high-stakes geopolitical standoff? Because he represents a reality that Washington doesn't understand. To a real estate developer, land is something you buy. You sign a deed, you own the dirt. But to the Inuit, the Arctic isn't divided by borders. The water between Nunavut and Greenland isn't a barrier, it's a highway. The people on both sides are kin. This concept has a name, Inuit Nunangat. When Canada brings Inuit leadership to the table, they are reminding the world of a legal fact. Under the Self-Government Act of 2009, the people of Greenland own the resources. Not Denmark, not the king, the people. And this isn't just symbolism, it is actual political power. Look at what happened in 2021 with the Kvanefjeld uranium project. An Australian company wanted to dig. There were billions of dollars on the table, but the local people were worried about the radioactive dust. They voted. A new government came in, and they passed a law banning uranium mining. The project died. That is the veto power. It is real. It has stopped billion-dollar projects before, and it can stop them again. So even if Trump pressures Copenhagen, even if he offers to buy the island from the Danish government, he can't close the deal because the seller isn't Denmark. The Governor General said it best during the visit. Sovereignty is not given, it is exercised. Canada is exercising sovereignty by connecting the people who actually live there. This is the soft power that acts like concrete. You can ignore a diplomat. It is much harder to ignore a united front of indigenous nations who have occupied that land for 1,000 years. It frames the American expansion not as a business deal, but as an invasion. So let's look at the scoreboard. 6 weeks ago, the narrative was that Canada was helpless, that we were just waiting to see what the bull in the china shop would break next. Today, the narrative is different. We have a consulate that acts as an economic anchor. We have a legal shield powered by the European Union. And we have a moral shield powered by Inuit sovereignty. Mark Carney is doing exactly what he said he would do. He isn't responding to pressure. He is removing leverage. He is taking the options off Trump's table, one by one. For a decade, the question in Ottawa was always, what will the Americans do? Today, for the first time, the question in the White House is, what are the Canadians doing? That is what sovereignty feels like. This game isn't over. The pressure on our trade deals is still coming. The tariffs are still a threat. But for one cold Saturday in Nuuk, Canada stopped playing defense. We drew a line in the snow, and we dared them to cross it. Thanks for watching. If you think this kind of strategic analysis matters, if you want to understand the moves behind the noise, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Hit the like button and share this video with someone who needs to see the bigger picture. We'll be tracking the response from Washington next. Don't miss it.